Dear colleagues, good morning. We are glad to welcome you here. For about 5 minutes, we will not be gentlemen. Well, what I mean is that we do not have our fourth participant, Mona. She's missing, but we will not wait for her. We will start right away, and she will join the discussion later. So how do we maintain cybersecurity protection without millions of dollars? First of all, I would like to wish Ostap Bender birthday. There are 3 disputable dates when Ostap Bender, a famous con artist, was born, and unfortunately, none of those dates were today. So that's why I had to throw away this plan. But we do have to remember that Ostap Bender knew about 400 relatively honest ways to con other people. But this was 100 years ago, and market has evolved. So now we need to understand what exactly is marketing and what can actually provide cyber sustainability of our organizations. And I would like to start with a question to Denis, and based on his extensive experience, maybe he could tell us what a decent human person would need to be sure that their organization is cyber protected. First of all, it's minimization of access, personal accounts. All the passwords should be encrypted and stored. Service passwords should be changed, just like accounts. There should be segmentation. Working stations and servers must have antiviruses. Segmentation must use VLANs and be monitored with the internal firewall. It's better to use 802.x protocol or MAC, or the endpoint. Users should have point of entry and point of access. Printers and scanners should be limited with their activity. Wi-Fi VLAN must be determined by the outer firewall. The ways of connection with third-party organizations must go through firewall. We all use emails, and it also should be used with SPF, DMARC. Different sandboxes for internal mails is also very important. Mail services must be updated. Login of all mail services, and it should be part of CM system. Spam filter should be applied. Everything should be approved with the Information Security Department. All the companies must use VPN to access their own infrastructure. It's better to use the main second-factor authorization. Everybody should use personified operating system. It should not be that 100 people use the same operating system. It is possible to use one client, better that the client has a profiling. It's also important to have host nodes for users. An updated operating system is very important. For Linux systems, it's better to use a pre-prepared image for pre-hardening. Dennis, how many pages you said? You had 6 pages of those. Well, maybe if people would like to learn about them, we can upload it online. Dennis, Kirill, online, maybe you can add a few very important points without reading from the block note.
Денис говорит правильные вещи.
Yes, Dennis is talking about the right thing. I agree. But maybe I can sum it up.
Инфраструктуру надо правильно,
Infrastructure,
либо создавать, либо модернизировать.
we either have to create the correct infrastructure or update it, taking into account security by design. What I would add, here are some recommendations.
Система в нашей терминологии это
The most important part are targeted systems,
выделять в отдельные сегменты и применять как
Maybe we should
внесенные
segment them
политики.
and apply all the aforementioned policies.
Инфраструктуры — это
An
превентивный
updated
контроль.
infrastructure is a
По сути,
preventive
правильно
control.
настраивая
That's
инфраструктуру, мы
basically when we
усложняем и удлиняем путь
improve our
тем, кто
infrastructure,
пытается
we
добраться
complicate the
до
route
наших данных.
for potential hackers
при
who
этом,
would want
если
to reach our data. At the same time,
в компании нету
if a company
средств реагирования, средств
does not
обнаружения
have
действий злоумышленников, то
some ways to detect the activity of malicious
что
users,
инфраструктура не сильно сможет помочь правильно настроена. Поэтому
then the infrastructure wouldn't really help. So we must not forget about
детект и реагирование.
detect and response.
Смотрите, я надеюсь, что
Thank you. And I hope that at least part of what was mentioned, I hope that Mona heard it, and Mona will join us. Let us welcome her.
Вот. Мы тебя ждали, прошу.
Mona, we've been waiting for you.
Вот, и скажи, пожалуйста, вот я надеюсь, ты успела услышать что-то там из
I hope you heard something from the 6 pages of Dennis and something that was added by Marat. What's your opinion? What are your thoughts on this?
Безопасность не нужна.
Well, we don't need
Все
security.
это блеф.
All that is a spoof. It's not real. Maybe you can give us some details. Well, what I mean is that we need security without security. There should be some person who would be talking and telling us what we should do. But all those millions and billions of dollars for information security, hundreds and thousands of people for operating system, but we don't really need that. We really don't need that. Patches are installed by IT people, firewall is set by InfoSec, compliance can be dealt by legal people, and that's all. Why do we need more? Okay, that's fine, but I have a few stories from my personal life, and here's one of the stories. Andrei was the source of the story, and it was connected with an attempt to find people who would do this unwanted information security. Andrei, maybe you can give a few comments. Okay, colleagues, I've listened to Dennis, I've listened to Marat, and it was kind of hard to listen to them. A lot of technical jargon, and we actually forgot about people. It doesn't work like this. We need to show our soft skills. We need to work with people. We need people, and we need the right people. If we are doing like Mona says, we need a really good IT people. But I'm pro-security. I think we need pro-security. I think we need security, but we also need smart security people. Oftentimes, one people cannot replace other people because they have different targets, they have different goals. IT people, what they get money for and what they get punished for is the same, the so-called time to market. They need to deliver something that business wants, and it should be available, it should be accessible, and should be reliable. But InfoSec people have a different goal. They need to make it right. They have to make IT people do more than they get money for and they get punished for. So they either have to make IT people do this, or they have to do this work themselves. I actually agree partially with your point of view that we can actually deal without extra people and extra money if we have a professional team. If we have a bad IT person and bad InfoSec people, then we have poor results. Well, actually, we can have a very easy solution. You can just take a whip and it works.
И рассказываешь программистам, как делать.
You work with customers, you go there with a whip, and you strike a few times and you tell them what should be done. You tell them what security is, and it will be done by just one person. This is what I did during the last 6 years. I would like to ask your question. Is this the same person or different? No, these are different. These are different, and it was enough. It was sufficient. Yes, I became the CISO before it became mainstream. Now I work with different customers, and it works. It works even when we are talking about expensive scaling of an organization. For example, they had 5 people and now they have 200 people. It works. But initially, you have to go there and you have to make people do this. When you have an established team, yes, it's more difficult. You have to hire a person. You have to hire a person, and it also works.
Тут вопрос масштаба организации.
Okay, so now we are talking about the scale of an organization. A scale from 5 to 200. 200 is quite low. Obviously, I'm not saying that you should have one person in a bank. We're talking about small organizations. Colleagues, do you have organizations who represent companies from 5 to 200 people? Please raise your hand. Okay, suppose 5% people wouldn't just raise their hand, but obviously not too many. Mono, what would you say to people who didn't raise their hands if they have more than 200 people in their organizations? Well, obviously, if they didn't, it's clear they probably have a lot of compliance in their hands. And when you have a lot of compliance, you have the minimum number of people you have to hire for different licenses. And obviously, you have bosses, you have managers who punish you for every wrong action. Okay, now let's get back to the question raised by Andrei to those who didn't raise their hand. It's actually a pretty bad example. At Positive Technologies, we cannot find suitable engineers for months. It's very bad. Maybe it's a poor situation on the market. Maybe we have some extra.
Мы агропромышленная компания. Средний, наверное.
Well, suppose, maybe we have some extra when looking for a specialist. Suppose you probably can spend about six months to find a good specialist. There are exceptions, but on average, it takes half a year to find a good specialist. The problem here is different, that the input, the inflow of people who want to get into information security is basically unlimited. And the lack of engineers generates the raise of salaries. And here we have a very bad thing. The wage raise, but skills, knowledge, responsibility do not increase. Suppose we have people who previously worked as tourist agents, and now they want to get information security. They just watch Python programming, ethical hacker, and they are ready to start working from 250,000 rubles. Well, it is a joke, but you actually have to start with interns, because you will not find a ready team. You have to create it yourself. Have you actually tried to raise experts from other departments? Well, we actually tried, but people get offended if we take their resources. Okay, but have you tried to pay information security people as much as DevOps people get? I do not know how much DevOps people earn. So do I have to change my job? I actually think about it myself. Yes, you can just finish DevOps courses in 3 months to be easy money. Okay, colleagues, I have a question from the chat. And the question is, everybody says that if you don't have money, you can use open source. But many people forget that engineers who can maintain open source is more expensive than working with non-open source. What would you choose, working with quote-unquote cheap open source or
Я бы ответил так,
working
всё
with
зависит
expensive
от вашего штата. Если
non-outsource?
вы open source можете
I would say it
поддерживать,
depends on
не
your
один
staff.
сотрудником,
If
который
you can work
станет
with open source, not just with a single
сначала
person
заложником этого open
who will
source, а потом
become
начнет вам
hostage of
выкручивать
that
руки
open
этим open
source and
source.
then will
А есть
start
команда,
to
то можно
blackmail
идти в open
you, maybe
source,
with
и
this
это
open source.
действительно
But if
дешевле,
you have a
чем
team,
вендорские продукты.
you can use
Если
open
у
source,
вас
it will be
один
cheaper
человек,
than vendor
то
products.
open
But
source,
if you have
скорее
just
всего, не для
one
вас.
person, open source
Я
is
бы
probably not
предложил
for you.
комбинацию.
I
На
would say
первом
that the
этапе, естественно,
combination
брать
is pretty good.
внешнего
First,
подрядчика
you
и
work
спокойно
with a
растить
third-party customer, third-party vendor,
внутреннего
and
сотрудника
then you
в команде
can
до определенного момента.
improve the expertise of
Я
some
предложил
of your
третью
internal
альтернативу.
experts. I would propose a third solution
Растить свою команду.
to
Но
nurture
если
your
есть
own
потребность
team,
иметь
but
качественные
if there is a
продукты
need
здесь и
to
сейчас,
have
идти
products of high quality right here,
SaaS,
right now,
если тебе нужно
then
просто
you can
потреблять.
go to
Если есть
SaaS, SaaS,
это дело все
if you just need
администрировать
to get those
ну,
products.
либо VAS.
And you can use
Спасибо, Мон,
different
это такой
as
выпуск, ты
BVS,
точно нам что-то скажешь?
PAS,
Облака белогривые
and I believe,
Да,
Mona,
это-
you have
Ага,
something to
давай.
tell us.
Выход 2. Вот, не, можно
Obviously,
начать
it's
с
very expensive.
МССП, не вопрос.
Sure, you can start with MSSP,
Инфраструктуру, как
but then you have to migrate from clouds to your own infrastructure. It's not a very, very
Ты
pleasant
знаешь,
thing,
вот у меня
let's
к тебе
say.
вопрос. Я беседовал с одним
I have a question to you.
руководителем одного из
I
ведущих
had a
российских
discussion with
MSSP,
one of the
и он
leading
сказал,
MSSP
что
companies in
многие к
Russia.
нам заехали с мыслью, что
And
ненадолго,
he said that
и никто не съехал.
people
Вот
didn't
как
think that
можете
they would
прокомментировать, ребята? Это очень
stay
интересная
there
история,
for
потому что
long,
услуги MSSP сейчас
and everybody
предлагают
stayed.
многие. В принципе,
MSSP is
понятная история.
proposed by
Матери
many.
слова, перевод,
Obviously,
капекс,
we can
вопекс и
understand this.
всякие другие красивые
Capex,
слова. Но вот
Vopex, and
насколько
other
это
terms.
действительно
But
решает
is it
вопросу
really a
оптимизации
solution?
бюджета,
When we're
обеспечения
talking about
необходимого уровня
budget
кибербезопасности,
optimization, when
и
we're talking
почему
about
такие люди
reaching
не
specific
съезжают из
level
облаков?
of cybersecurity, and why do these people do not leave
Потому
clouds?
что кадры,
I would
про
say
которые мы
it's
говорили, это
suitable
становится проблемой не
for
бизнеса,
business,
а MSSP.
because this staff
Все
problem
риски,
becomes
про
MSSP
которые мы
problem, not business
говорим, выбор
problem.
решения, это
All
тоже
the
становится
risks
проблемой
looking
MSSP.
for a solution also
И
becomes the
для
MSSP problem.
бизнеса
And for a
это удобно.
business, it's a very suitable solution.
услуги аутсорсинга
Do you
своим
provide
клиентам?
outsourcing services for your customers?
Они
Yes, we do.
считают, что это для них
Do
дешевле,
they think
чем
that
самим
it's
что-нибудь
cheaper
настроить и
than to
команду
create it
нанять?
themselves
Сначала
and
они
to
считают,
hire their
что
own
это
team?
дороже, потом они сами
First, they
попробуют
think
и
that
говорят, что
it's
нет, с вами
more
дешевле и
expensive,
проще.
То есть
then
они
they
от вас тоже
try,
не уходят.
and then they believe that
Хорошо,
it's
Марат,
Чтобы
cheaper.
уйти,
So
представляешь,
they
надо
don't
сделать
leave you
еще раз
either.
собственный проект по внедрению
Okay,
всех
so you
сервисов,
have
которые у
to
тебя на
have your own
MSSP.
project,
Вот прийти
all the
в
services for
команду, сделать
MSSP,
проект,
and have your own team
и на это все еще
to have the
будет
project,
финансирование перед этим.
and to
То есть
actually
ты
get the
подтверждаешь то, что
finances for
сказала
all
Мона,
that.
вход рубль, выход
So
к
you
вам.
basically repeat
Хорошо, уже
what
пошли
Mona
другие цифры.
said.
Так,
It's
Андрей.
very, very
Ну,
cheap
опыт
to
у
get
нас
in
это
and
скорее
very
баланс,
expensive
да,
to
это
leave.
баланс, позволяющий управлять
For me,
деньгами. Я не
MSSP
говорю
is a
полностью
balance.
всё MSSP, да, если
I'm not talking
команда
about
достаточно
the
большая.
complete
Это баланс
MSSP,
функциональности,
but still
денег
it's a
и
functionality balance,
экспертизы, да. То есть мне найти
functionality, money,
или
and
дорогих
expertise
людей
balance.
достаточно узкую
For me to
функцию
find
с рынка,
one or two person from the market for a very,
мне
very
проще эту
specific
функцию
function is
когда
basically a quest.
функция либо разрастется
It's easier for me to outsource this. Once I have this scaled up so that I can get it
Понятно.
in-house,
То бишь
I
ты
will do
вначале,
that. But
когда
for
тебе надо
now,
быстро
it's
получить
easier to
какие-то функции
outsource.
безопасности, ты идешь к MSSP, порастишь
So when
компетенцию,
you
вот,
need
например, о
to
чем
have the
говорил
solution right
там
here, right now,
Денис,
you go to
и
MSSP,
потом
then
возвращаешь
you
эту
improve your
компетенцию
own
внутрь
experts, and
организации.
then you return this
Мон,
competence
Красиво.
inside your
вот,
information.
добавь нам какую-нибудь
Так, сейчас
огня.
Mona,
выберу
maybe you can share your opinion.
какой ИБ,
Okay.
IT или бизнес. Пожалуй,
What should I choose
Давай.
between
ну,
InfoSec,
со стороны
IT, and
бизнеса
business?
нет, конечно,
I think I will work on the
всё
business.
значит, это просто
For
это
business,
отлично,
OPEX
замечательно.
works
Со
brilliantly.
стороны бизнеса
That's a
могу
very good
сказать,
point.
пробовали ли вы,
But I
например,
can say
нанимать
this.
людей вот
Have you
всех
ever tried to hire
Пробовали
people
вы, например, нанимать людей на ДГПХ
who-
в штат? Пробовали ли
work as
вы обращаться за
freelancers
разовыми консультациями? Не там, где 25 раз в
for
год,
specific
а в этом
consultations?
анекдоте. Да, взять человека, который знает,
you
где
tried
стукнуть, заплатить
who-
ему чуть
to
больше.
work with the
Ну,
person
раз.
who knows
Пробовали.
where to
как?
actually work,
Так себе.
where
У
to
меня
knock,
отличный опыт.
Но сейчас мы опять...
Да, но если
Yes, we have tried, and it was not a very good experience. Well, but I do have great experience. We should not forget that we have MSSP, we have responsibility separation matrix, and if you read it closely, you will understand that it's quite expensive. Why do people still use MSSP? Obviously, if you want to migrate it from it, you have to have your own team, you have to work with your own infrastructure, and for some time you would have to pay X2, maybe X10, depending on the tech stack chosen for that solution. That's why it's clear why people still use clouds, why people still use MSSP, and cloud solutions have great incentive for startups when they have big budgets and they actually start earning money in about 3 years. Do people actually move from clouds, especially based on the current political situation? Well, it depends on the situation. Some migrate, some don't. I would like to say that in general, I think it's true, but for me personally, a cloud, working with the cloud, getting there, then migrating to their own infrastructure, it's a strategic solution. I do understand that in the moment I will pay X2 for the migration, but for the long term, obviously, if we calculate it properly, then I will win in the end. Yes, your own infrastructure will bring you back money in 3 to 5 years. This is the question what Mona basically answered. We have IT, we don't have money, we don't have information security. What you can do if you don't have enough resources and enough competence? And Mona, you already mentioned this, maybe you can repeat it. Okay, so the solution is pretty simple. We have the previous version of sys controls. We have 17 versions. If you have clouds, you can use those. If you have your own servers, you can work with CIS20, the previous version. And it states there what you should implement, what the priority, what you should deploy. If we're talking about CIS20, then the first 6 points of 20 cover about 70% of vulnerabilities, typical vulnerabilities. And this is what's clear for IT. This is what can be done. This is why I love IT people. They see a very specific recipe for what should be done. You can just take it and you can do it. And you don't try to solve some kind of organizational problem using technical solution. And when should IT do this? Where do they get the time? Well, it's easier to find an IT person rather than InfoSec person. Well, this is what IT actually are doing. They are doing it on a daily basis. You just have to make it into a system and make it into a process. Okay, so we have some kind of agreement here on our panel. We have a mix of IT and business and InfoSec people. And my question is as following. There are people listening to us, but are you ready to spend 1 billion rubles for information security? Yes, we have a few people, even fewer. Yes, and the next question, why should you spend 1 billion rubles? Okay, that's funny, but my next question is, your top 5 recommendations. Mona already mentioned that maybe she'll add something else. How do you provide, obviously based on the scale of the company, an acceptable level of information security and cyber protection without spending too much money? Now I would like you to be financially conserved. Dennis, I would like to start with you. How would you decrease your 6 pages? What would be the
и узнал
bullet points of
то,
this.
про что забыл.
I would start with the audit of my infrastructure. I would see what was forgotten, what was not updated for a long time, what can be removed from exploitation because it's not used anymore.
Мини-аудит compliance
I
сделал.
would start
На
with
мой взгляд,
my
это основное, что может
own
сделать
audit
человек.
compliance. I
Для
think
него
this is
очень
the
часто
bare minimum for
откроются
something else to
новые
do.
доступы, забытые
They will have
системы,
new
неправильно настроенные
accesses,
политики,
old
когда
systems,
есть доступ из ДМЗ к системе,
wrong
которой уже нет.
policies when they have certain access to a system which no longer exists, and so on.
Не имеющий никакого отношения к
I have an
кибербезопасности,
anecdote
но
from
имеющий
my
отношение
life
к обычной безопасности. Есть такие
which
автомобильные
has something
гонки,
to do with
называются ралли. И когда
security.
приезжает гонщик на
There are
скоростном
rally
участке,
races,
судья
and when somebody
проверяет у
goes
него,
there to a
все там
race,
пристегнут,
the
шлем
judge
там на него
checks
надет и
if
тому
they
подобное
have
безобразие. И судья говорит,
seatbelts,
что
if
если
they
там
have a
поедет какой-то
helmet,
40-й номер,
and if
мы даже не
number
поймем, что он
40
без шлема и
gets
не
there, we won't be
пристегнут,
able
потому что
to
глаз
understand
замылен. И вот
if
насколько,
they
вот
do not
власти
have
работы, которые, безусловно,
a
правильно ты
belt, and
сказал,
if they do not
насколько
have
осмысленно их
a
выполнять
helmet,
внутренними силами,
because
либо
for some
привлечь
reason they cannot see
внешнего
this.
эксперта, либо экспертов.
Ну, собственно, если денег нет,
And that's the reason I'm talking about this.
внутренние силы.
If you do not have experts, you can only rely on your own efforts.
Спасибо. Но это
Obviously,
шаг
it's
номер,
better to use a
как это,
third
0, с которого
party
надо начинать, с твоей
to
точки
get a
зрения.
better assessment.
Спасибо.
You believe that
Спасибо,
this is step zero, this is something you should start from.
Аудит, желательно инструментальный.
I agree with audit. It's better to have an instrumental audit with scripts.
Много под эти задачи.
There are so many scripts in the community for these tasks. It's very important to have self-audit.
Проверки избыточности прав.
It's also very important to see the
Самое простое, да? Внедрение
to analyze privileges, working with two-factor authentication, even open source,
если это не влияет на бизнес, legacy-системы
and
какие-нибудь.
switching off legacy systems and old protocols if it does not affect the work like SMB 1.0. Well, you're laughing, but we had customers who had SMB 1.0 and it was working, it was active. And obviously working with
Спасибо.
authentication services.
Немножко такой больше
Андрей?
процессный
I
совет.
think I have a more process-oriented
Называется
advice.
избитой фразой security by
Right.
design. Прежде чем вы
I
что-то
think it's called
делаете,
security by design. Before you start doing something, you should think about security. There are guides, just as Mona mentioned, there are quite simple
объяснение, как ту или иную вещь
explanations
просто подумайте
how
о
to
безопасности. Это самый
set
простой
this
способ
or that
сэкономить
service protocol.
консалтинг,
Just think about security when you are designing something
Ровно на
else.
ту тему, о которой ты говоришь, вопрос и ровно к Моне.
We had a question to Mona.
Вопрос
The
Моне,
question
а не
is,
дороже ли получится
isn't it
обеспечить
more expensive to provide
компетенциями,
IT
которые
competence
организуют security by design? Это не
or
твой вопрос,
security by
случайно?
design? Wasn't this a question to you?
Нет, нет. То есть, если мы берем...
No, it would not be. If we are working with CSA, it's basically a very simple guide. This is what you should do, step number 1, step number 2, step number 3. But I should remind you that there are companies that already work with security and those who will work with security. So if there is no demand from business, it's basically impossible to promote this because businesses have different tasks and goals.
Нужно, давай.
Еще
Mikhail, I would like to add a few words. Another
Меняйте
free
mindset
advice.
собственника.
Change
С бизнесом
your
надо разговаривать.
mindset.
Потому
You
что,
have to talk to business.
потому что нативно им
And it's better not to scare them because originally they do not understand this problem. You have to talk to them, you have to explain this to them. You do not have, you cannot solve fear, but you have to talk to them.
Круглый стол, на котором сидели
There is a one
достаточно
interesting
крупных
situation. There was a roundtable discussion
компаний.
with
И я задал
CISOs
вопрос,
from
ребята, вот
big
несмотря на
companies,
все
and
вот
I
эти вот
asked them,
меры
despite
безопасности,
all those
если
security
происходит
measures,
инцидент,
if
что
there is an
вы
incident,
делаете?
what
Ответ
do
был
you
следующий.
do? And the
Ну,
question
наконец-то
was
мы можем
answered as
попросить
this.
у бизнеса
Oh,
денег,
finally,
но
we
инциденты мы
can
не
ask
провоцируем.
business for money, but we do not
Вот. И
provoke incidents.
и у
That was the
меня
answer.
вопрос тоже. Ребята,
So my
смотрите,
question
мы сейчас
is,
обсудили те
we've
меры, которые
discussed
действительно в
the
основном, если
measures.
посмотреть на то, что вы говорили про
You basically mentioned
контроля.
IT control.
То есть нечто, что мы делаем для того,
Something
чтобы
which we do to decrease the probability of a potential attack. But what we do if it actually happened? Obviously, we do not want to spend 1 billion rubles.
Сначала надо изолировать
Well, first of all, you have to isolate hosts which were attacked. That's step number one. This is immediate for investigation. Will we do this with IT hands based on what? I'm sorry, but I will have to ask these questions.
Не знаю, как ответить на этот вопрос просто.
I don't really know how to answer this question in a simple way,
Айтишники первые
but
узнают,
IT people will be the first to learn about the incident.
они,
And
знают,
these
что нужно
IT people
изолировать чаще всего.
should know
Они не
what
знают,
should be isolated. They do not know how to do that. They try to reinstall the information or the operating system, trying to cover up the information changes settings. And I would like to ask our colleagues
Первыми узнают об инциденте
comment
пользователи. Всегда.
that IT people will be the first to learn about the incident. Well, actually, it's not true, because users will be the first to learn that something went wrong, because something doesn't work. Okay, and what happens if an incident actually happened? What would you do?
Не бывает. Все-таки
Well, we don't have miracles. If we are not talking about 1 billion, but some reasonable information security, you have to have response and react measures. First you have to detect and then you have to respond. Obviously, you have to have them and you have to spend money on them. Otherwise, when you have the incident, you can just cut off the internet, switch everything off, you can cut off Wi-Fi, and then take a look on how to cure all of that. Well, we can have a different solution. We can start with password changes and privileged accounts so that incident would not spread. Okay, Andrei, Mona?
Слушайте, ну, соглашусь с Маратом, что первая часть
I agree with Marat
пользователей, вторым
that
узнает
users
сок,
will
третьим
be
узнают
the first one to learn.
Есть сок.
Second, as SOC or Security Operations Center, and third, IT people. Yes, SOC will learn about this only if you have SOC.
Можно сок за миллиард?
Here we have a question. You can have a SOC for 1 billion rubles, or you can have it for free with the hands of the same IT people.
Самый там
Because
столовый
billions of events,
Вот
even the most experts will not be able to go through all the events. You can do a cheap SOC. It's all about desire. I had great experience working with and mixing different shifts and departments, working with big companies up to 2,000 people from first line of SOC, and the most critical incidents went there. And it's true that IT people learn about this faster than information security people, that some kind of incident happened that affects the business. If we're talking about cutting off the internet and starting an investigation, well, if I, as a business, go there and
сервис, который приносит деньги, в том числе вашу зарплату, какого фига?
obviously I would not be happy.
Наверное,
Because there is a service, it pays money, it pays your wages.
самый простой вариант, если мы говорим про
Obviously, the most basic solution when we're talking about BCM, when we're talking about
самые критичные
uninterruptible
для них просто иметь бэкап.
businesses, they should have backups, at least 1 month of backups. Or they should have processes on MSSP in parallel.
Не, разумеется.
Obviously, they have limitations, but they can run this in parallel. Okay, colleagues, but now we can, so to say, change the chairs. Mona already said that she goes from one chair to a different, but imagine that you are a company that has 1 billion rubles to spend on information security. How would you spend
Я,
it?
наверное, первый отвечу.
Давай.
I think I'll be the first one to respond. And I would say,
У меня
I do
достаточно
not
большая
know.
компания, 40 тысяч сотрудников.
I have quite a big company, so 40,000 employees, but I do not spend
Я не
1
бегу
billion
за
rubles.
комплайенсом, да?
I'm not trying to chase compliance
Не нужно,
and
не
this
делаю. Я использую
quadratisch practice goods approach. I do not really use this. I try to use my resources and tools as effectively as possible. Obviously, I can try and think where I can spend 1 billion rubles, but I don't really need that. Do I understand you correctly that you have an internal balance of services, MSSP, working with commercial products, maybe working with something else?
Продукты коммерческие.
No, it's
Их утилизация
commercial products, basically no open source, but when you do it correctly, they provide a very good output. This is basically security by design, all that. Yes, that is true. So we had a question before to Mona that security by design can save us from billion rubles expenses. Yes, I invest in my team, not in my tools.
Но я бы все-таки провел,
Marat?
скорее, вот теперь уже внешнюю оценку киберустойчивости.
I would have a third-party assessment of my cyber stability. I would see the results,
Есть недочеты, уже там
and
ориентировал бы новый бюджет.
I would use my new
Может быть, и
money
надо
for these new vulnerabilities.
существенно меньше.
останется от после
But obviously, I would start with the third-party audit. Dennis, you have a customer who tells you that they have 1 billion rubles and they want you to save them. What would you do?
По пути Марата провести аудит.
I believe that Marat is correct. You should have a third-party audit, select the tools, and to recommend the rest of the money to invest in their business so that they have more money for information security in the future. And for Mono, selecting between information security and business, I would start with the full-fledged red team, full-fledged social engineering, throwing around different USB sticks, getting into the office with first-person drones, trying to look into your monitors and stickers, like the real red team, not just some basic pen test that they found some loopholes. Pen test is just a slice, but full-fledged red teaming is the real comprehensive report, phishing, social engineering, all that. And then I would split this budget 50-50, and I would spend half of it to solve the problems based on what red team was able to find. And the other I would spend on the business. That's why we have business. Basically, that's true. Red team is not just audit, it's more about practice. Because when we are talking about audit, it's just a part of it. They could have OSINT, they could have like open source intelligence, they could have social engineering, they could have different webinars, but it's also a way to physically penetrate the system. We think that cybersecurity is just about users, IT systems, and practice. No, cybersecurity is a very mass project. It's very actually funny to find some weird hardware in an admin working station. This reminds me of a story. My customer was hacked and somebody
Мы пришли на аудит.
got into their office and they just stole the hard drive from the chief accountant. It's much easier than do it through the network.
Никто нас не встретил, не проверил.
I have a different story. We were able to get into the company. We were able to get up a few stories, get into the PC, and it was not protected by a password. So we went actually in a different company. Nobody stopped us, and this happens. I would like to remind you that we have Cyber Range, and you can go there and you can see how it works, how Red Team works in real industry, in real life, and that's why I highly suggest you go there. It's just around the corner. Colleagues, I believe this is where we should wrap up our roundtable. Maybe if you have some ideas to conclude, and if you don't, then we can leave. I would like to say that Your team is the most important factor. You should raise, you should nurture it, and you should stick to it.
команде как бы делиться практиками и смотреть
And you should share your expertise, and you should look outside, because there are a lot of best practices and recommendations which you should study. Colleagues, you should not be...
Если его готовить правильно.
Well, information security is cheaper than marketing, so you should not be tricked by marketing plans and tricks. And I would like to recommend you to work with IT people and actually think a little bit when you have to manage the balance between IT and business, because control for control's sake doesn't really work. Colleagues, thank you very much for your ideas and the questions we all wanted to discuss.